Hello, friends, and welcome to the Interworld podcast, where we explore the intersection of personal and collective transformation. My name is Yasha S. Wagner, and I'm a PhD researcher in the field of psychology, well-being, and spirituality, as well as the founder of the Interworld Institute, which is a nonprofit for inner world peace. You can learn more about our various initiatives by going to interworld.org. Today we have the great honor and privilege of speaking with a very dear old friend and collaborator, Raya Llopis. Raya is a licensed acupuncturist and healer, a practitioner of traditional Chinese medicine or East Asian medicine, with graduate school training within that tradition. Raya is also a clinical herbalist of Chinese herbal medicines, and she is a professor at Naropa University, now teaching courses about the Chinese 5 elements theories. So it's really, and practices, and it's really exciting for me to be interviewing Raya on these topics. Raya and I have quite a rich journey that we've been on together over many years as friends and bandmates. We have a full-length hip-hop album that we co-created, and it's out on platforms. You can find it out there under Original Currency Renaissance. We have opened for some world-famous musicians and done events all over the country actually together. So we'll share more about that during the episode, as well as our upcoming plans with Raya teaching courses through our new online hybrid academy, and likely even becoming like a department head and core faculty of our academy. So we'll share more about all of that in the episode. Thank you for joining us today. So glad to have you on the podcast, Raya.
Thank you. I'm so honored and excited to be here.
Yeah, so I know that we have a lot of content to explore. This might be the first of many episodes, but I just want to start by introducing you more fully to the audience. I'd love to hear more about kind of your journey and what brought you to this point, to this passion. And if you want to just share a little bit of your own background and backstory, maybe we can start there and explore from there.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I feel like just like everyone else, it's a life journey, and I've always been a lover of movement. I've always been a kinesthetic learner and just moving my body. And in high school, I went to a performing arts school for dance, and then, when it was time for college, I just didn't feel called to anything yet, but I knew I loved movement and I wanted to experience the world. And so I actually signed up for this performing arts company called Up with People, where I got to travel to 27 countries, learning different movement practices, living with host families from these different places I went. So this really opened up my whole life to understanding that there is so much more than our little bubble, that we're raised in. And it just kind of sparked this desire to continue learning different cultural wisdom. So I went to India learning um, Ayurvedic medicine. And then in my 20s, so that wasn't even, I was still in my 18, 19. And then around 21, I moved to Sacramento and opened up a yoga and dance studio and was sharing, what I had learned. And after 2 years, I kind of realized like there's more I got to learn. Like I feel like the movement is such a powerful way, but what about the mind? What about the spirit? And how do we connect that? And that's actually when I met you at Naropa University and had just a really great experience and met Marlo Brooks, who taught the class that I now teach at Naropa University called Chinese psychology of Chinese five elements. And that was like this first introduction to understanding our connection with nature, with our spirit, with our mind, with our body, and how true healing is that involves all of that. And it involves not just our own connection to self, our connection to others, our connection to this earth, and our connection to our ancestry. And so that kind of then flourished and grew and birthed this idea of going to get my master's in traditional Chinese medicine. But along the way, I really started to kind of dive into my own heritage. I'm mixed. I have roots from Africa, from Asia, and then my grandmother is Cherokee. So I'm really, there's an expansive opportunity to learn about myself, but then not having the elders to really guide me and are like the family members are like my grandmother like was not very connected to her ancestry. So that kind of, made it that I had to take it and try and figure it out on my own. And I always say, like, for studying East Asian medicine, there is an intersectionality between wisdom traditions. Like, if you look at all of these amazing wisdom traditions around the world, they all have this nature connection. They all have this aspect of spirit. They all have this connection to the emotions in the body. And studying East Asian medicine or traditional Chinese medicine, in a way, felt like trying to learn more about myself. And so, yeah, that's kind of just the gist of, the journey thus far. And I mean, this is not only, about healing our mind, body, and spirit and healing myself and wanting to heal and share this knowledge with my family, but this is like my social justice work. I truly believe that knowledge and reclaiming our knowledge to and our connection to the earth and to ourselves and to each other is, how we're going to get this collective healing that is really, really needed right now. So it's a part of my mission, my social justice work, by sharing this information with others. And I feel so honored by my mentors and elders who have been a part of this journey for me.
Beautiful. Yeah, yeah. So I think that that the whole theme of this podcast is going to keep expanding and it's going to keep evolving, but the core that it always revolves around is that intersection of personal and collective transformation. And so what that means, we'll need to keep exploring, and that's the point of all of these conversations. But I love that that's at the heart of your own work too, and how you see the sort of inner work and the connection to our own roots and to our own sort of spectrum from physical well-being to spiritual awareness as like the way towards collective healing as well for the planet. So I think that's really beautiful. And I'd love for you to have a chance before we move on to share a little bit about just your actual work. Anything you want to add about your own roots and travels that you were just sharing? That was very fascinating to me. I'm learning some of this for the first time. So anything you want to add in terms of highlights from the kind of journeys you've been on, the influences in your training and modalities that you've explored, but then especially as you've come to work with Chinese medicine in particular, in East Asian medicine tradition, where do you see that like going, and what's your current kind of scope of your passions and your offerings, what you do for people, if you want to add anything on those topics?
Yeah, I think the heart of it for myself as a practitioner, as just a being, is to share this knowledge. And, like the word doctor, doctieri, to teach, to share, to, reclaim this amazing knowledge. And from all of the travels, like, and reconnecting with my own heritage, my dad's family is from the Philippines, and having the opportunity to go there and learn from my aunts and my uncles and my cousins who I didn't even know existed until 2012. And seeing their deep connection to where they are living. And that's what I really learned in these different places that I think, these Western countries really need is remembering our connection to the earth. Like we have so much, a lot of distractions that kind of keep us away from our connection to earth and on our connection to each other, and just like being present and being here in our spirit and being here in our body. It's a lot of, this or trying to escape. And I think that traveling, seeing the world, learning from these different wisdom traditions, that focus again is on nature, is on the spirit, is on the body, is on the mind. That's where we need the healing. And again, my passion is to share, whether I'm seeing a patient for acupuncture, for clinical herbalism. I'm not just going to poke you and give you herbs. I'm going to say, okay, this is what your body's sharing. These are the symptoms that you have shared with me, and this is what, I'm learning about what's going on in your body. So I'm trying to also teach them to learn about their bodies and learn about what foods are going to be healthy for them. How is their spirit? Where's their thoughts and their mentality right now? And what kind of cycles are we in? Are we in cycles of health and well-being? Are we in a destructive cycle? And we call that in Chinese medicine, there's two main cycles, the Shang cycle and the Ke cycle, but we might get into that in a little bit. But yeah, wanting to teach people and share this knowledge. And I feel like these wisdom traditions, like Ayurvedic, like Chinese medicine or East Asian medicine, they just have they've made it for thousands of years. They're still, they've been tried. The people have tried to distinguish them and put them down and hide the truth and burn the books, and they're still thriving. And that is why I truly believe this medicine is what we need right now, because just like nature, if something's not right, it's going to try to find that balance. And I think that through this medicine, hopefully that we can learn to find that balance too.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful. No, and just for those that may be only listening, I saw you kind of gesturing with your thumbs, like basically implying that what does it mean to become really present, right? What does it mean to inhabit the present moment and embody our consciousness and our spirit in the here and now with our surroundings, kind of be awake and aware to what's happening. So that, and what I'm hearing too is that there's this deep innate sense of connection to nature from within, to our own nature as inseparable from nature, from the spirit of the land itself, from the elements
Mm-hmm.
of life. And we'll get more into all of that. It did also make me think of the time that you've spent on the islands of Hawaii, and I heard you before we started recording express your love for that land and the energy of the islands, which you're welcome to share about if you want. But I just want to echo, and I think that this is a recurring theme that we'll keep exploring in some of our episodes, and that's already coming up with the guests that we're booking that are sometimes practitioners of different natural healing modalities. And this is what you're sharing, that many times there's like a discounting and a discrediting of those approaches. And there's also been historically like a suppression and a repression of these natural healing methods. But as you point out, they are not only resurging in popularity now as much as ever before, but they're also very, very ancient, and they're quite sophisticated and complex. They're not just some sort of, feel good woo-woo idea. There may be misunderstanding that makes it seem that way, or misuse that makes it seem that way. But in reality, these ancient nature-based holistic healing and wellness and medicine practices that exist in different forms among all kinds of indigenous nations all over the globe, have been cultivated and developed in quite an advanced manner by many different civilizations over thousands and thousands of years and tested by time. And it's like, why would so many people put something to the test and study it so deeply, and not give up on it for so long if it was just useless? And so the truth
Hmm.
is, these things are in and of themselves an ancient science, a science that might belong to different worldviews and paradigms, different ways of thinking than what we're used to in our dominant kind of modern Western science, but very much worth studying in my view, and comparing and understanding. And so I'm glad that you're representing Chinese medicine for us today. And yeah, I'd love to dive into some more specific topics. If there's anything you want to add first, feel free.
No, I think that's great. And yes, as I was kind of mentioning before we even started, like I just want to honor this lineage and like I want to give it justice for everything that it is, and everything that these lineages holders and practitioners who have kept this wisdom alive, like just so much honor and gratitude and carrying this forth. And this idea of like, I know this medicine is meant to be used. It would just be such a shame if we had this knowledge, but it wasn't being shared because it is so helpful in so many different ways and so many different layers in our lived experience.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for doing that. And I don't really have time to go into all the details right now of the journey that we've been on, but just to like kind of briefly give a little bit of context and share where we're heading next. Um, so you and I, Raya and I, have we've known each other well over half a decade, over 6 years, seven, and have studied together and taught together. And as I mentioned in the intro, released an album together. And so you have deeply supported and collaborated on Heartfire events in Colorado many times, all kinds of gatherings and retreats that we've done in Colorado. And then also in California, in Oakland at the Place for Sustainable Living, we had a big event that was really
Yeah.
fun. And then we had a big event in New York together, where we actually, with Original Currency, with our band, got to open for Modest Yahoo, the world famous, one day musician, and he loved our music. So that was a lot of fun.
Hmm.
And now we're moving into a new phase where with our institute we're creating this hybrid academy. And so I'm just excited that you're bringing the knowledge of Chinese medicine, and I just want to pay respect to how much you've studied and trained yourself, through your grad school, through your world travels, through your kind of comparative analysis of different modalities, and just like your own connection to your own roots and your own ancestry, and that you've really come to this point with a great deal of expertise and are now a college professor and so on. So I'm really excited for you to be leading, spearheading one of our first departments and concentrations in the academy. So you're not only bringing the knowledge of traditional Chinese medicine and East Asian medicine to this podcast right now, but you're also going to be teaching courses about it in our academy, and you have the first one coming up soon. So we'll share all about that whole department and all those courses at the end of the episode. But let's go ahead and dive in now. So I'm going to kind of give you this stage, and I'll lead us through a few different topics, but I just want to start by inviting you to introduce and define for us the basic sense of what exactly is traditional Chinese medicine, what is East Asian medicine, and we'll get into the fundamentals from there.
Yeah. So it is a deep connection and honoring and an observation of nature. Chinese medicine, East Asian medicine, the foundation is observation of nature. That is what our ancestors did thousands of years ago. They just observed the cycles of nature, what was happening within nature, and they started to then, create and write down these observations. And number one, I just think that's just the most beautiful thing. They weren't trying to manipulate nature, they were just observing, just seeing these natural phenomenons, and then recognizing that we have these natural phenomenons going on within ourselves. We are not separate from this earth. We are a part of this earth, and the earth gives to us, and we give back and nourish the earth. And just from that foundation, I think it's so beautiful. There's so much to honor in that, so much wisdom in that. And then this aspect of realizing and connecting with everything is chi, everything is energy. There's this vital energy that connects us all. That is the foundation of life itself, of this earth, of this sky. And then this birth of the duality of chi, this yin and yang aspect, again, kind of categorizing what they're seeing in nature. They see the sun, yang, they see the moon, yin, and just kind of categorizing, breaking things down into this duality, but understanding that you can't live without the other. We need day, we need night, and that there's this constant balance that is happening within nature. And then again, really realizing and putting that to our emotional, physical, and spiritual, there is this duality within us that's constantly trying to create balance. And then from there, the birth of the five elements, starting to categorize what they see in nature. They see water, an element. They see wood, which represents like plants and trees, and fire. So fire and water were the first two elements that kind of were categorized into this yin and yang aspect, fire being yang, water being more yin. And then the element of earth, the soil. And then we have the last element, which is metal, which represents iron, minerals, gold, and life. And seeing these different cycles of nature. And I kind of mentioned it before. There's this Shang cycle, the cycle of creation, and how each element in nature nourishes and supports, like the seasons, how each season will support and nourish the next season. And then the Ka cycle, which represents this balance of excess or deficiency. If you have too much of something, it can destroy or control our balance, the other element. And these cycles, these elements are happening within our own body and our mind and our spirit. And so with the elements, they broke down our own lived experience, our own spiritual connection. So spirit pertaining to this vital consciousness that animates life, and then our emotions and our physical body, like our organs, our blood vessels, all of those kind of went into these five elements. So you're taking like thousands and thousands of years of just starting from observing nature, and then how our body reflects rivers and like through our blood vessels. And it's just so fascinating. My mind is like, I just get it. It's like my spirit gets it, on just this level when I'm learning about it. When I was in school and just working with my mentors and learning about the herbs and these acupressure points that move throughout the body, I could feel it like on this it's internal level of just like, wow, this makes a lot of sense because it is through nature. We are a part of nature. And I think that's like the essence of East Asian medicine is this observation of nature and knowing we're not separate from us, and that we can learn so much about our health and healing through nature and the different cycles that nature moves through and how they also move through us.
Beautiful. I love it. And it sparks so much inspiration for me that I'll probably share later. There's a lot of correlation there to my own research and studies, and as a Tai Chi teacher, and in terms of observation of nature, we'll come back to that. But before we move on from these sort of foundational principles, which you just did a beautiful job of introducing, the foundational principles of Chinese medicine, right? Before we move on, I want to just give you a chance. So, first of all, to recap, it's like that we're covering qi, yin and yang, and then I don't know if I've heard you in your conversations with me speak about the three treasures. So, if you wanted to kind of give us a basic outline of that concept, so that we get some of this terminology, and then we'll move deeper into the five elements that you already referenced.
Great, yeah. So one of them we mentioned chi. Chi is this, we all are part of chi. It's this energy, this life force. And chi has many different forms. So there's our breath, that's chi, that air. We have food chi, food, that we actually eat that has energy that's fueling our body. And we have like this physical form, our body is chi. So there's, yes, different forms of chi, but it represents this life energy that is moving through everything, the plants, the chi of the sun rising, this chi of the sun going down and the moon rising. So everything is chi, everything is energy. The second is Shen, and Shen represents, you know, I always try to figure out like how do I say it in like a Western perspective, right? In like Western words. But the best way we can describe Shen is this aspect of like consciousness. And uh, Chinese medicine, as I mentioned, there's the five elements. They categorize our Shen into different aspects that make up our vital consciousness that animates our life, and our hopes and our dreams and our creativity and our inspiration and joy and wisdom and fear. So it is kind of that totality of all of the different um, consciousness and experiences we have on like a psyche level, like our mind. And
Yeah,
then
I like that. I want to reinforce that, like mind with a capital M, because sometimes in our modern times we start to think of mind, especially in like the self-help, new age wellness spheres, as just the monkey mind, just the egoic day-to-day internal dialogue or chatter. But that's not how the ancients in most traditions would have used the word mind with a capital M, which is
Mhm.
actually that space of consciousness that can even go beyond thought. And also, I think you used the word psyche very appropriately there, which is a direct translation from Greek for soul. Like our soul is that capital mind. So I love this. Thank you for introducing Shin
Mhm.
in that way. And I don't mean to interrupt if you want to
No,
continue.
I'm glad you did because I think it's important. Again, like I'm trying to be a bridge of like how to explain these ancient concepts that are in a different language to a Western perspective and language. It's hard. Like I'm still learning how to appropriately do that. And again, giving these, you know, the giving it justice for what it is.
Yeah,
Um,
we want to honor the whole thing. And I also just want to say that my research has been that we part of the way we discredit other paradigms and worldviews is that we just assume like our basic way of perceiving is correct, which is unscientific in and of itself. And so there's like animistic ways of perceiving the world, consciousness that's pan panpsychism, meaning everything is energy, like you said. But what if everything also has this quality or dimension of psyche, or like not just aliveness in terms of energy, but aliveness in terms of consciousness or intelligence? So these are very
mhm.
deep concepts, but
Yeah.
I'm sorry to keep interrupting. Let's keep going.
No, it's
Yeah.
good because
Yeah.
it just, I mean, I'm just gonna also talk about that for a second. It makes me think of like a plant. A seed is growing, like it maybe can't be like, okay, I'm going to grow in this direction. Like, not that we know of, but it has this ability to know that it needs to grow up through the soil and rise. Like that is some type of chi moving, that is hard to explain how it just knows to do that. So it's just interesting. So hopefully I'm not going too much off on a tangent, but it is quite it's quite interesting.
Yeah, the whole
Okay.
universe is doing it. Okay, back to
Yeah.
three treasures.
Okay, the third one is known as our Jing, which is our essence. And this is, again, trying to define it in like a Western perspective, like our ancestral DNA. It's what we inherit from our lineage, from our family. And we only get so much, like we get what we get is when we are born, that is how much we have. So we can't, this is a aspect of chi, of energy that, as we age, the jing starts to, leave the body. And so it's a part of us that kind of gets our, gray hair, but it is this growth and reproduction essence that is within us. So those are the three treasures that we all have that connect us all.
Okay, yes. So as people can tell, all of these are portals into deeper topics, and we're only scratching the surface today, and we'll keep going in the future, especially through the courses themselves. But let's go ahead and move on from these foundations of the three treasures and the sort of polarities of yin and yang, observation of nature. And so let's get into the five elements a little more. So you spoke about the creative and destructive cycles. And I think that if you could explain more specifically, like how, let's start with creative, like each element feeds the next so that people understand exactly what we mean by that.
Yeah. Okay. So let's think of water. So if the next element is wood, like a plant, to birth that, you need water to create wood, a plant. And then wood burns to create fire. Fire turns into ash to create earth. Earth becomes minerals, metal, and then metal births water by creating sustenance, the minerals that helps to support water. So that's how you see it in this creation cycle, just with the elements. But then if we go even deeper and think of the seasons, you need winter, and that corresponds with the water element. Winter goes into spring, the wood element. Spring goes into summer, the fire. Summer goes into late summer, or the middle-ish of the year, representing earth. Earth then goes into autumn. So when all of these cycles of nature and seasons are flowing smoothly into the next, that represents balance, nourishment, creation, and that is the Shang cycle. The Ka cycle represents the nature trying to control, try to create balance, or it shows how it can be destructive. So for example, we'll start with water. If there's a fire happening, you can put a little bit of water to help extinguish the fire. If you put too much water, then the fire will completely go out. So again, you can use water to help kind of balance this energy or this element of fire. But then it also represents, if you do excess, it can destroy that element. And so it continues through each element. So how does that connect to us, right? I think that's the big question, is like, well, how does that connect to us? So with that, each element, like I was mentioning, has different correspondences, and they have an emotional, a physical, and a spiritual correspondence. So I'm going to talk about it on the spirit level and the emotional level. So in the Shang cycle, the cycle of creation, we'll start with water. Water represents the Ger spirit, our wisdom, but it also represents the emotion of fear and the polarity of fear. And that's something that we need to remember, that our emotions aren't just, one type. They actually have a polarity. There's an excess expression, which could be more yang, and then a deficient expression, which could be more yin. And when we can find the balance, that's when we can actually use these as emotions as a way to navigate forward and create cycles of health and healing between ourselves and each other. So the water element, fear and wisdom, if we're stuck in fear, we can then have a hard time moving into the wood element. And the wood element represents our creativity. But if we're able to take this fear and turn it into wisdom, we can grow like a seed moving through the earth, the unknown, and start to create plans and ideas and dreams and vision for ourselves, which is the wood element. And when we're able to do that, we're able to move up into the fire element, which is about joy. We made these plans and these visions for our lives. Now we're able to actually see the manifestation of these ideas and these dreams. And then from there, we move into the earth element, which represents nourishment, our yi spirit, our intellect, and able to kind of pick the fruit from these experiences that we've created in our life and allow them to continue to nourish us. And then we move into the metal element, which represents this ability to let go. It's our ability to let go and our ability to breathe in inspiration. And you have to have both. You have to be able to let go to be able to receive. Because if we try to receive, but we haven't let go of the past or things in our lives, it's like, a cup that's over like full. You can't put any more in it. You can't get more nourishment. So when we're able to release and receive these little blessings of life, then it kind of brings us back into the wisdom of ourselves, which is that water element. So you're seeing how these cycles of Shang and our at least emotional and spiritual can help to create, healthy patterns, create a healthy mental state, our spiritual state. Does that make
Yeah,
sense? Yeah.
it does. No, it does. And I love just also picturing the imagery. I love that it's a dynamic and not a static system that doesn't just show how the elements contain each other or interconnect. It shows how they're in constant um, interaction with each other, how they directly like influence and relate and become one another, whether that's fire burning wood or earth compressing into metal. Like all these things is so fascinating to me, and I think that we could get into so much detail maybe in the academy with that. But I just want to say thank you for introducing that. It's very closely aligned with my own studies and work on the elements. And I also want to shout out, we were chatting about how we both like the Marvel movie Shang-Chi, that's clearly influenced by Chinese alchemy and sort of the esoteric teachings of that tradition. But also you were mentioning Avatar: The Last Airbender, the old children's anime cartoon, which I adore and highly recommend as another good example. And so I just think I want to shout out those kind of cultural and artistic representations that can express the same principles and convey some of the same knowledge, which you're welcome to touch upon. The main reason I'm bringing up Avatar is because I think people might, they're the classic. So there's like classical element systems all over the world. And basically everywhere you go, you find these incredible alchemical systems of the elements at the foundation of these traditions that are very ancient. And they often have these layers of meaning that correlate not just to the physical world, but to all these different dimensions, such as our psychological and spiritual components. But they very often represent earth, water, fire, air, and then a fifth element, quintessence, spirit, akasha, ether, right? So I have studied and have something to share in the episode about the correlation there that excites me a lot. But I've also heard you speak about it a little bit, and I think that there's a very cool alignment there between both of our understandings of it. So if you want to share anything about that, I'd be happy to hear it before we move on.
Um,
In
no,
terms of, yeah, in terms of the alignment between the Chinese five elements and the classical five elements of different alchemical traditions that I'm talking about worldwide. So if you want to speak to that, you can, or I can get more into it, but I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts about those correlations and the difference there in the element
mhm.
representation.
Yeah, I think the first thing that kind of pops up is like metal is like I feel like the one that is different, but not. Like there's still the intersectionality of like what it actually is and like its connection to air. Metal is connected to the lungs and the air that we breathe. And again, yes, I think there's so much intersectionality between these amazing wisdoms and again their connection to these elements and just the names that they picked for them, but there's just the overall connection. And I'd love to hear more about what,
No,
your
that was
insights
perfect.
too.
We didn't, yeah, I'm really glad you said that. And that's exactly what I wanted to hear from you, which we didn't conspire on, but I wanted to hear you share that teaching because I wanted to establish the similarity there before I share um, my findings, which is that you're naming that in the Chinese medicine tradition that you're well trained in, there's already this understanding of a correlation from the metal element to the air element to wind to the lungs to breath. So this already begins to create a much more direct alignment across really global ancient traditions around these
Mhm,
elements, which is really cool. The reason I'm bringing it up is because this is a main theme in my dissertation, my doctoral research, and the elements. And what I found is that there's a system in Japan called Godai. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. And these are represented as the elements with these geometric shapes, um, which is also the inspiration for the stupa we want to build here at the Eco Village in some ways. But these elements in the Godai system of Japan um, are actually directly coming from influences like Chinese medicine. So the history of it is that there's this direct correlation between the Godai system and the Chinese system. Um, However, they have translated it in Japan, and this is a very old tradition, right? So this is precedent. This isn't us trying to enforce a similarity now. It's going back and saying, oh, this similarity has already been acknowledged by these ancient traditions when they've interacted. And the
mhm,
way that they recognized that back then was basically when the Chinese five element system came into Japan, um, it did go back into being earth, water, fire, air, and quintessence, we'll call it, the fifth element. But they correlated metal specifically to air and wood, right, to ether, to life force. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Like the wood, the spirit of growth. It's not just the earth, it's not just the soil, it's the actual plant life. There's this quality of going from like mineral to flora and fauna, and that's like between heaven and earth, between the sky and the ground, we have this coming to life of existence as we know it.
mhm,
And that's like the fifth element, right? How all the elements feed into and combine to create life as we know it. So I just wanted to name that because I think it's a really beautiful example of the understanding the deeper underlying meaning of the elements and how they can even correlate across traditions.
mhm. Definitely. Thank you for sharing that.
So let's keep going. I wanted to hear from you if you could give us like a full picture of what acupuncture, pressure points, meridians, and just the whole subtle body, the relationship of like the organs and the energy body and these channels is all about. Can you just for speaking to a novice, like how do we get into that part of the whole understanding?
Well, the channels represent the pathways of the organs. And we know this external path or the internal pathway of what our organs are doing and where they're moving blood and fluids. But this goes more in depth of like understanding that there is these internal pathways and then these external pathways that are on the outside of the body, on the skin. And I mean, again, thousands and thousands of years of working with people in their communities, these practitioners, it's still mind blowing to me, like how, when I'm learning about these different acupressure points, these energy points in the bodies, and it's like, oh, this has been used to treat hemorrhoids. Like how do they know that? Through thousands of years of practice and working with individuals in the body. But I like to say there's something when you're doing acupuncture that happens, and it's called the chi. And I always like to imagine it as if there was a door and there was wind pressing on the door, and then you open the door and the wind is able to move through. Like that is what you are experiencing when you are getting these acupressure points. It is in East Asian medicine, we say wherever there is pain, there is stagnation, stagnation of chi, our blood, our fluids in the body, whether that's emotional or again, more of this physical like blood or lactic acid buildup. But when you are able to, tap into this chi, again, everything is energy, work with this energy and release these blockages in the body, whether they're again an emotional, long-term stuck energy or the fluids or blood in the body, it's like opening a portal, opening the door, allowing your fluids and your chi to flow smoothly. And that's what our body needs. We need to be in that shang cycle. We need our fluids to move through the blood vessels. We need it to move through the skin so that we are living in harmony. And whenever there's blockage, that's pain, that's dis-ease occurring in the body. And so these channels are a way for us to access on a physical, emotional, and spiritual level. And these points represent that. They have this physical function that they're doing. They can help to tonify or nourish these different organs or sedate them if an organ is in excess. But they can also help to nourish our spirit, our psyche, our emotions, help us move through these emotions that begin to get stuck. And when I say that, again, remembering everything is chi. So when we hold on to emotions for a long period of time, that chi begins to coagulate and become phlegm in the body, which could be so many different, signs and symptoms like tumors. That's a form of phlegm that would be in a very excess, condition. But these channels are a way to kind of access that and have many levels that we can tap into to help us heal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I find this system so fascinating. The way I see it is that we have multiple dimensions to our bodies, and that we're not just physical beings. The physical dimension of our being is a particular density on the vibratory spectrum of chi that we are,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, love
Um,
it.
and the way I see it is that we also have these subtle energy bodies, right? And I think that this is
Hmm.
very interesting, even in relation to the yogic traditions of India, the ideas of the chakras and the subtle bodies
Hmm.
and channels there. Those systems also speak about nadis, which are like these points
Yeah.
of energy that are subtler, smaller chakras, so to speak. And similarly, within the Chinese and East Asian medicine system, there's not only these meridians, right? These like channels or
Hmm.
rivers of energy. There's also
Hmm.
like these dantians, or lower, central, middle, and upper kind of oceans, from which those rivers branch out and come back to,
Hmm.
of energy. So there's so much we could we could keep exploring there. And it's a very deep topic. Maybe we'll see what we're
Mm-hmm.
able to come back to. But there's also this. So to me, I just really respect your work as an acupuncturist because I find it so fascinating, the science of how you can know like where all these points connect, where all these channels of energy lead to, how points in my ear could relate to other organs in my body, and so on. And at our equinox event the other day, you were teaching about like the channel related to the liver all the way up your leg and all this, and the pressure points I also find really interesting, right? And this is just such a sort of esoteric topic. It's used in martial arts, it's used in kind of Taoist alchemy, and you were talking about our essence and Jing, like practices of breathing and Jing retention, different pressure points you can touch to heal a headache, to pressure points. In Tai Chi, there's the bubbling well, that's our connection to the earth at the bottom of the foot. And you also mentioned a pressure point at our last event, on top of the foot. So I was wondering if you could share any like key treasures of, before we move on from these acupoints topic, any like particularly juicy or exciting knowledge for people to walk away with, or have a taste of like understanding how these pressure points might work on their own body, or these meridians and energy centers.
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing that I see just in clinic is a lot of people can be a little bit scared of using like needles. And so I just want to speak to this because I think it's important. And it goes back to this aspect of da chi, of like moving the chi and blood and fluids in our body. Because when you do acupuncture, again, it's all energy. Like I'm connecting with chi of life. And I'm trying personally transcending that energy to help open up. It's like a key, something's been locked up. So I'm using this key, this needle and energy to help open, to continue the flow and get into that Shang cycle. And when you have this acupuncture experience, it feels different for everybody, that Da Chi feeling. It may feel like an electric feeling moving throughout your whole entire body. It may feel like numbness and tingling. And practice in like China and more in Eastern countries, they want to feel that feeling. Like if you don't feel Da Chi, that electric feeling, that numbness, that tingling, it's like, oh, the treatment didn't work. You need to feel the chi moving through you, moving through your body, and just inviting people to have more of that awareness. Because I think in the West, it's like, oh, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. I don't want that feeling. But there's a difference between like a pain response and this numbness and tingling and the kind of like electric feeling. So I just want to share that with people because I think that's something that if you're new to acupuncture or that you've never done acupuncture, to know that this is an important part of the process of connecting with these different channels on an internal level too. Because they're connecting to, your nervous system. They're connecting to all, it's going into your body. You're connecting to it on a physical and then again on the spiritual, emotional level, just through the understanding of moving chi, whether it's emotional or more physical.
I think this really helps tie all the themes we've been talking about together, because it can start to feel kind of wide ranging and hard to wrap your mind around all of it. But you helped just now with this understanding that these channels and these points, energy points and energy centers, are related to everything we've been talking about all
Mm-hmm.
along, because they're like a map of how the universal chi or energy is moving. And so it has these yin and yang qualities. It has these qualities of consciousness. It has these elemental qualities from nature. But it also moves dynamically through our system along these channels and concentrates in these different points and centers. So thank you for tying that all together. And I love that you used the word electricity, because I was comparing it to like a sea and rivers, where the water is the chi, but you could also think of it as wiring, like circuitry of electricity moving through our system,
Mm-hmm.
where the electrical current is what needs to get unblocked and pass through the circuitry of those wires. And I could almost see the centers as like, maybe it's a breaker panel or a battery, like this, the universal energy is the source, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then it's moving through us through these kind of concentrations. And yeah, it's very, very deep stuff. You mentioned, how different symptoms can show up. And we have a few more topics here to touch on before we close. So I want to move us on to anything you can share, which will be somewhat new for me. And I'm excited to learn about this idea of diagnosis and how you observe what you use within the East Asian medicine traditions, in order to understand where a patient may be at and kind of self-diagnose as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's kind of the key when it comes to diagnoses is inquiry. And this kind of reminds me, like I took a lot of, in the master's program, there was a lot of psychology classes because that is kind of the first step of like talking with your patient. What are they going through? And using the five elements and the aspects of yin and yang to help, ask these questions. So again, as I kind of mentioned, each element has a different correspondence. So that has organs, that has the emotions, and then it has a spirit. So if people are like, hey, I've been having like a lot of digestive issues. Okay, so now I'm thinking earth element, spleen and stomach. So then I'm going to start asking them questions about emotionally, physically, and spiritually in correspondence with that. And then figure out what's the root cause. Is it actually that they're having stomach issues? Is it a physical thing from something that they're eating, or is it an emotional or a spiritual thing? And is it actually coming from that element, or is it coming from that ka cycle where something else is actually out of balance, and now you're just experiencing the symptoms of stomach? So first one is inquiry, asking questions, really getting to know the person that you're working with. And then we also do pulse and tongue diagnoses is a big part of it. And I'll start with the pulse. There are six main pulses that we're reading, and each pulse connects to your organs in Chinese medicine. So this is very different, a different aspect compared to Western medicine, right? When we're reading the pulse in Western medicine, we're thinking, okay, how many beats per minute? We're not thinking, what is the quality of your pulse? What is the rate of your pulse? Um, is it feel full? Does it feel deficient? So we are really trying to figure out, more than just let me count how many beats. It is the quality. Is it um, fluid? Is it kind of bouncing where, like when you're feeling the pulse? It is quite an art because you have to really be present and grounded and this is something I'm still learning. Again, this is a life journey process to really be able to get in touch with your own, not only intuition, but instinct, because you are, reading this subtle, energy and having to kind of navigate and understand these different qualities that it could represent. So that's the pulse. And then we do tongue diagnoses. So the tongue is the most external organ that we have. So by looking at your tongue, I can tell if what the environment of your body is. So just like in nature, we see, oh, it's damp here, or it's really dry, or it's really hot, or it's really cold. Your body through your tongue tells me what the environment is like. If your tongue is very dry, the internal environment is dry. If you have a lot of dampness, or you have a lot of mucus or like fur on your tongue, that's telling me there's could be a lot of dampness in your body. And if there's a lot of If there's redness of the tongue, heat. If it's blue and pale, maybe more cold. So I'm reading the internal environment of your tongue, which is very, very helpful because when you're asking questions and you're reading the pulse and then you're looking at someone's tongue, it's like, oh, this, now I'm seeing a big picture. If I'm just asking you a question, I don't really have the big picture. I can't really be like, oh, this is the body. Now your body's actually showing me. Like you can tell me something, but when you have your body, to back it up, it's like, okay, this now I'm getting like more foundation of information here. And then lastly, I just want to share some other instincts that it's important, especially in Chinese five elements, is being able to use your senses. So obviously, like observing what is the person, how are they presenting themselves? What is the hue around their eyes and their lips? What is the smell that is coming from them? And then if we're treating someone more physically, doing these different range of motion tests. So it's like, therapy, physical therapy, and then, you can kind of combine all of these Western practices that are more individually into like, that's what we're doing. The whole diagnosis is, all of these things put together.
I'm really glad that's you basically just said what my response is going to be, but I love what you're sharing with us because you're describing what a truly holistic approach looks like. And this is, a timeless science of looking at things holistically rather than compartmentalizing them into separate disciplines that don't even communicate with each other. What does it mean to become interdisciplinary, which is starting to happen more? And so this isn't, from my end, I'm not trying to disparage Western medicine by any
Yeah,
means. I think
totally.
that it's very valuable. But I love, you're really pointing out what our limitations are because, for example, we know there is an unbelievably important, way more than we even understand yet, but we can already see with Western empirical methodology that there is an unbelievably important and mysterious level of connection between the mind and psyche and so on and the body and our health. We know that that's there. But how do we actually, what do we do about that? And it's like, well, for example, you're saying you're starting with a psych eval, let's say, right? You're starting with evaluating someone's psychological state, meaning that the foundation before you even go into their physical health is how are they doing psychologically? But this is where it gets really interesting because we're limited in a way where, a doctor might come in and not do that and just prescribe something physical based on physical symptoms. And yet, if we start with the psychosomatic origin of the issue, what you're describing goes beyond that because a therapist also might not be paying attention to as much of the somatic component, like maybe a little bit of body language. But when you describe the quality of their pulse, the coloration of their tongue, like, all of these subtle cues, what's a person's eyes look like? What's a person's breath and posture? What's the way they walk? What's their tone of voice? Like these are
Mm-hmm.
much more embodied ways to analyze where somebody is at and intuit and feel and engage with where somebody is at, even on a psychological level. So it's so interwoven, and I find that really fascinating. I
Mm-hmm.
want to move us forward with the time we have today
Mm-hmm.
into, you got diagnosis, and then in the Chinese medicine tradition, you're prescribing plant-based herbal medicines. And if you could just give us a basic rundown and introduction to Chinese herbal medicine. Ever since I was a child, you know, I heard stories of, my dad having some big injuries or issues and like not being able to fix it until he went to an amazing Chinese herbal medicine doctor and like took some tea that was incredibly bitter and difficult. And every day it got a little sweeter. And by the end it was delicious and he was all better. So there's all kinds of stories about this, but I'd love to hear you give us an introduction.
Mm-hmm. So first, yeah, it is so powerful because the most powerful medicine is what we eat. And that's also what drew me to Chinese medicine. And understanding when it comes to herbology, I mean, that's where pharmaceuticals derived from originally was just through learning about herbs, right? And then now they've been synthetically processed and all sorts of things. But I think from there we can just understand herbs are amazing, and the and what we're getting from the earth is healing. It is what we, if we didn't have that nutrients, we wouldn't be here, right? So there's just a big connection of understanding that herbs are very powerful. And it's sad that there's been such a I think the oppression of the medicine that the earth provides for us when it just comes to Western thinking. But going back to just herbs in general, when it comes to Chinese medicine, is when we're looking at herbs, there are the taste and the temperature is very important. The taste represents, like, if it's sour, if it's bitter, if it's sweet, all of those also correspond to the five elements, but they have a different function. So we're looking at, if a herb is bitter, it's going to help to clear heat. So if someone comes in and they have a very red tongue and they are having fevers and are experiencing inflammation, I'm going to give them some bitter herbs to help clear the heat in their body. So we're looking at these tastes as very important. And then the temperature is very important, because if you have, and when I say temperature, like, not necessarily like if you put in ice water or anything like that, but just like the temperature of the herb itself. If it's cooling, then, if someone's experiencing symptoms of like a cold, you wouldn't want to give them a cooling herb necessarily, or if they're experiencing a fever, you wouldn't want to give them something that's spicy or hot. So temperature and flavor and taste is really, really important in Chinese medicine. And then categorizing that these tastes and these temperatures go with different organs. So if someone comes in and they're having bloating and stomach issues, then we're going to want to find herbs that are going to match in temperature and taste and that work with that specific organ. So it's very, very detailed. And again, a lot to learn, a lot to learn, because it's not just, oh, this is an inflammatory, but what does that actually mean? What is the taste? What is the temperature? What organs is it going to? So yeah, it's very in depth, and it's very beautiful because it's very connected to our physical experience, and then also to our emotional and spiritual experience as well. So that's kind of the gist.
Yeah, thank you. Can you give us one quick highlight of an example of an herb for people to be aware of, a plant that's useful to know? Do you want to give us one?
I mean, there's so many.
Pick one
Um, the
or three.
first
Yeah,
one,
go ahead.
okay, well, I guess I'll just go with, because we're in
Yeah.
springtime, so I'll just say Juhua, chrysanthemum, and goji berries. It's springtime. Spring represents the liver and the gallbladder. So both of these herbs help to clear the liver, clear any heat in the liver, help move the qi in the liver. The qi is responsible for moving blood. For menses, so if you're having any type of um, cramping or clots in your blood, for those of you who menstruate, this is a great herb. Any blurred vision, Juhua, chrysanthemum, and goji berries help to nourish the blood, specifically in the eyes as well. So it can help with any dry eyes or any eye issues. So those would be the two, at least for this season, that I would recommend for you guys to try out. And you can make a tea with both of them, or you can put goji berries in anything. You can just eat goji berries, but you can put it in your soups or congee or oatmeal and so forth.
Yeah, awesome. I love this. Well, we might have to one day plan a follow-up episode for those that prefer the podcast format and want to just hear us go off on all the different specific pressure points to use and herbs to use and movements and diet and all these things. But yeah, thank you. And I like that you shared, that the different, it's our food and the different substances we imbibe. We want to be mindful of what they're doing to our body and mind. And many come from the world of plants and fungi and so on in one way or another. And this is a great segue into the broader topic that we certainly won't be able to unpack today, but the topic of the sort of cultural context overall. And the reason I say it's a segue is that like those herbs and those plant medicines are often brewed in the form of, for example, teas. And I'm mentioning that because there's this great, ancient spiritual science of the sacred tea ceremony and this incredible art of how the tea ceremony is administered. And it's just amazing, the East Asian science of ceremonial tea as a practice. And so I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to that knowledge and also say how it relates to this much broader ancient cultural tradition that we'll be able to touch on a few key points here and there as we wrap up the episode now. But we're barely scratching the surface. And of course, calligraphy would be another example of like an ancient cultural art that's tying all the different dimensions of our being together, both as a creative expression and as a deep meditation, a deeply altering way of combining art with spiritual practice and so on. So whether it's tea ceremony or calligraphy or the knowledge of feng shui, which hopefully I'm pronouncing correctly, you can, so all of that, it's just, and I think that feel free if you want to speak to, for example, tea ceremony. But what I really want to get into is the word kung fu or gong fu, which means like the cultivation of skill. It's the work, it's the cultivation, the work, the effort that leads to skill and ability. And so that's a very interesting topic for me as a martial arts instructor, because people think of Kung Fu as one specific Chinese martial art form or lineage, but Kung or Gong Fu, which is, by the way, the same exact word as in Qi Gong or Qi Gong. In Qi Kung or Qi Gong, there's the cultivation of Qi, skill with moving energy. So literally we do Qigong exercises as a warm-up or a preparation and deepening and training for Tai Chi practice, because you want to cultivate good Kung Fu, good Gong Fu. So Qigong could literally translate as energy work, Gong being work, right? So I'm sharing all of this just to kind of, if we want, segue, and I'll share a little more here at the end of the episode on these topics, but just segue into our last couple themes here, and martial arts in particular. And so I will share a little more about that. But before I do, I want to invite you to speak on any of this, and in particular, how it relates to Chinese medicine and to the movement of Qi. And you yourself are a movement practitioner. You had a yoga and dance studio. I know you also were a massage therapist and body worker, and I've seen you, doing work with dance, and we've done work with art and creative expression and singing and all of this. So it's all connected, and I just want to open it for you to share anything in terms of movement practices and creative expression and all of that in relation to these topics, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's like if chi isn't moving, if it's stagnant, it creates pain, whether that's emotionally, physically, or spiritually. And movement is a way for us to move chi. Emotions are chi, remember? Spirit is chi at its essence. So we can use movement as a way to help us move that chi on a physical, emotional, and spiritual level. And I feel like the creativity comes in where people can tap into what brings them joy, whether it's dancing, whether it's doing yoga, kung fu, different practices. But I think our ancestors from India, from China, from all of these different places, they understood that movement was a part of the healing process. Through yoga, through qigong, like we have to move because that is a way to help us on a physical level move our fluids and blood, but it also helps us move through these different emotional experiences. It could be an outlet to help us heal. and work through different things. And that's, yeah, I believe it's such a big important part. And that is also when you're, we talked about diagnosis, but then when we talk about treatment, it's not just acupuncture, it's not just herbs, it's lifestyle, and lifestyle includes movement. And again, I rarely recommend whatever that is for each individual person, to really find what calls to them, whether it's just moving in their house, but for me, I love salsa dancing. That is like Latin dancing is a huge thing for me. I love acrobatics. I love being able to do handstands because it's my body that I'm working with. Yoga practices, all of that, like those are my three kind of movement practices. But I use it to not only help me have this physical health, but emotionally and spiritually to move through different things that I'm working through in my life. So I think it's very, very important. And when I was growing up, I did ninjutsu with my dad. So that was like the first martial arts and that's when I first learned about like the meridians or acupressure points was through martial arts.
I'm really glad you mentioned ninjutsu because the Japanese system of Godai elements is directly from that. And there's like, esoteric systems of ninjutsu that, for example, talk about control of the elements, literally like in Avatar: The Last Airbender. So
I
maybe
love that.
where they got some of that. It's and there's like the animal frolics within the qigong forms we do that represent each of the five elements through the movements in relation to
Hmm.
particular animal totems associated with each one, and that same quality of associating phenomena in nature, particular animals, or even mythological animals and so on, is seen throughout different aspects of the tradition, which I'll probably touch on in just a minute, kind of to transition us into our last theme from movement. I'm glad you shared, dance. I think I've heard it referred to as the ultimate, like the highest yoga or the original yoga. And there's yoga all over, right? There's movement in form of this like science of dance, for example, and it's whether it's in South America or in Africa or in Asia, all over the world, there's these practices of movement and dance. And I think another shout out to Japan, that I love this idea of forest bathing. I think one of the best movement practices, which I love living near the mountains to go hike, is just be in nature, go walk and immerse in the elements, just moving by walking through the woods, for example, once a week, can be very harmonizing for our whole body and mind.
Hmm.
Um, so I wanna move us from these topics into kind of our last major theme as we start to wrap up, which is that uh, we started, and I promised to come full circle. We started with this idea of observation of nature. The meaning of the word Tai Chi is basically, some call it the supreme ultimate boxing because it's like the internal martial art that only once you master it can the softness and lack of resistance overcome any sort of use of force. But it's also translated as the great separation, referring to the distinction, the great opposites between yin and yang, when we kind of exit Wu Wei, the undifferentiated, and step into the yin and yang. And the reason I bring it up is because observation of nature, the literal definition of that is like the mountain ridge, the ridge line at the top of the mountain, where one side of it is north facing, darker, shadowed, has more snow, different vegetation. The other side, south facing, lighter, hotter, has its own vegetation, its own ecosystem. And that distinction of the sort of yin and yang sides of the mountain as they flow along this natural ridgeline at the peak, is kind of the meaning of Tai Chi and that razor's edge that we dance on. And so I find these topics very interesting. Even and this is all a segue to our last topic, where just like the animal frolics are this observation of the bear, the deer in nature, right? Excuse me. in the same way, there's these systems of magic and alchemy within the Chinese tradition, these esoteric components, like the inner dimension of Tai Chi starts to relate to Neidan, the internal alchemy, where, like you said, we're removing the blockages, we're clearing the stagnant energy so that the Qi can just keep flowing through our whole system, not just on a physical, but also on a subtle level. And we see these same mysterious sort of symbols from nature, whether it's in the I Ching, right, the ancient I Ching that predates the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. It's much earlier. It's a very, very ancient text with an incredible system of divination related to it. And even the I Ching, they say, was based on observing a tortoise shell, and all the hexagrams of the I Ching and all the combinations of the hexagrams come from the hexagonal geometric patterns on the shell of a tortoise, again, observing nature. In Chinese astrology, there's the 4 symbols, again, associated with different creatures. And elements and seasons, directions, right? So this is just to bring it full circle back to observation of nature. And if you want to share any last thoughts on this topic of like the magic, the alchemy, the astrology, and this kind of internal or more esoteric dimension to the tradition of Chinese medicine that stems out of these alchemical roots before we close.
Yeah, I mean, I think just going back to traditionally, like when you would see a healer, like they would do a divination, they would do an I Ching to, again, see the web of everything that's happening with the person. So I love that you mentioned that, because I think that really brings it back to this like foundation of, where the essence came from. And when a practitioner from, an ancient practitioner, what they would do, like it was mind, body, and spirit, and it had all of these different components into wanting to help to heal the person. And I also want to share that I was reading yesterday the Tao of Nutrition, and it talked about how a healer or a practitioner, a doctor, was more focused on preventative health and, wanting to nourish the spirit, the body, and the mind before somebody was sick. Like that was the ultimate healer, was someone who could help someone before they actually were sick. And again, that comes back to nourishing the spirit and the mind, and how important that was even then, for the health and well-being of all beings and nature itself.
Beautiful. Yeah. That's cool to hear that like an I Ching casting, which again reflects all the same patterns, the broken and unbroken line, the creative and receptive energies, everything we're talking about. It's like this incredible codex somehow that's just like interwoven through everything and throughout different aspects of the tradition. And yeah, I think that on another day we could go on forever. Even just the topic of Chinese alchemy and Neidan itself is so deep. I think I mentioned in another episode on this podcast to someone, like the Chinese actually discovered gunpowder before Europeans, and they did it through alchemy, searching for a panacea or elixir of immortality through sulfur and so on. So it's just like these topics go so deep, and there's so much we could keep exploring. And whether it's how to do an I Ching casting or all of these things. So that's why we're creating the East Asian medicine department within the academy. We don't even need to do a whole follow-up episode, because we're going to create entire courses. And that's where I want to kind of bring us to close, is to share about that and how we're getting started. By the time that this episode goes live, the first course will probably be launching pretty soon. So if it's not already, I want to invite you to share a few words about kind of inviting people into what the Reclaim Yourself course will be. And I just want to say also thank you. So those will be my last words at the very end. And before I before I thank you and kind of end the episode, if you want to just invite people into what these first courses that we'll be offering might look like.
Yeah. So the first course is Reclaim Yourself. And this course is about reclaiming our ancestral knowledge. And again, remember that as we kind of spoke throughout this whole kind of conversation about all of these amazing lineages having this connection to nature, this connection to our mind, body, and spirit, and each other. And so this is about reclaiming this knowledge for our own self-healing, for our healing with nature, and then in community with each other, working through the 5 elements and learning the different correspondences and how it relates to our mind, body, and spirit, and observing our own connection to nature and our own internal nature that make up who we are. And so this one is really close to my heart because it's about this connection with ourselves and nature and each other and learning from nature and just really kind of giving the foundations of East Asian medicine and how we can use it to help heal ourselves, heal our communities, and reclaim our knowledge and our birthright of health and connection and wellness with nature. The second program that we'll be launching is an intro into Chinese medicine for practitioners, are people from all different professions, whether it's psychology or body work or energy work, whatever it may be. This is a course for people who want to take it a step further rather than just maybe using it for their internal self-work, but with patients, our clients, and sharing this knowledge. So that one's going to be going more into depth about diagnoses and how to, different options for treatment plans, things like that, getting more into herbal medicine. And then we're going to have specific courses just on herbal medicine and a bunch of more great stuff like we've kind of covered. But those are kind of the first 2 courses that we will be launching. So I'm very excited about them.
I'm very excited about it too, and I'm really glad that you'll be our teacher and core faculty in this program in this online academy. So this is one branch of our entire nonprofit institute is this hybrid school that we're creating. So anybody from anywhere in the world that's listening actually can sign up and study directly with Raya. And literally each of the topics that we went over today will actually be creating entire courses to dive into each of those. So we've just briefly introduced, the foundations of Chinese medicine, the 5 elements system, acupuncture and the meridians, the Chinese herbal medicine, all of these different things, and even alchemy and martial arts, the I Ching, all of these things, we're going to create courses that people can dive into and really train themselves within this particular tradition. And that's the reason I wanted to end by saying thank you, because I think that that's so exciting. And I hope that people can feel from this first episode that we're doing together, and which is also in the first season of the whole podcast, where we're really heading with our content, because this is just starting to give a taste. Eventually we'll be able to show images on the screen, slides that demonstrate exactly, what the elements are and the cycles we're talking about, where the meridians are. Eventually we'll be sharing all of that and more, introducing practitioners of different modalities, experts in Ayurveda, indigenous elders from the Americas, and all kinds of different guests. And so both through the podcast and the academy, I just want to say thank you for helping nourish and bring up level that energy that we're building and that vision that we're creating. And really looking forward to the courses you'll be offering, and hopefully people are enjoying and will stay tuned and sign up for that. So I'm looking forward to the continued journey with you.
Thank you so much. I just feel so blessed and honored to be a part of this. And then I just want to do a big shout out to this lineage, all of the ancestors that continue to share this this medicine with us all and dedicate this conversation to them.
Beautiful. Thank you for the ancestors, for the new
Same.
generations that can learn from this. And yeah, thank you again. And hopefully, we'll post links and everything. People can learn about your work and stay connected.
Alrighty.
Thanks,
Thank
Raya.
you.
Yeah. Peace.